It didn't happen all at once. That is the part people always miss. From the outside, success looks sudden. It looks like one viral song, one big break, one moment where life transforms in an instant. But behind the scenes, the story is almost never that clean. Change usually arrives quietly. It creeps in. It starts with small shifts that are easy to ignore, easy to excuse, easy to believe will correct themselves. One day, everything is moving in the right direction. Money is coming in faster than you can spend it. Your name is everywhere. Your future looks untouchable. People around you treat you differently. Doors open. Calls get returned. Opportunities seem endless. And then, without warning, the current begins to turn. So here is the first question that hangs over this entire story. What happens when someone goes from making $100,000 a day to watching that number slowly disappear? And even more important than that, what kind of choices does a person make when they can feel that reality closing in? This is the story of Fetty Wap, his rise, his wealth, his pressure, and the decision that would change everything. Before the fame, before the charts, before the millions, there was Willie Jr. Maxwell II. Patterson, New Jersey. No industry machine waiting for him. No safety net. No silver spoon. No easy path laid out in front of him. Just survival. That matters, because a person's beginning often shapes everything that comes after. When you come from a place where every day is about making it through, you learn how to adapt. You learn how to read people. You learn how to move fast, trust carefully, and take what you can before it disappears. Fetty wasn't pretending to be somebody else. He lived the kind of life many people only rap about. He moved through a world where street money was part of the reality, not just a lyric. He knew what it meant to hustle, to navigate risk, to make hard choices when there were no good ones. And unlike so many artists who later distanced themselves from where they came from, he didn't erase that part of his story. Instead, he turned it into music. Now think about that for a moment. How often do we hear songs that sound authentic, but are really just manufactured? How many artists sell a lifestyle they never lived? How many careers are built on image rather than truth? With Fetty Wap, it felt different. There was a rawness in it, a familiarity, a sense that he wasn't inventing a world for the audience. He was pulling the audience into the world he already knew. That was part of what made Trap Queen explode. It was not just a catchy song. It was a window into his life. A relationship inside the street economy. Love, loyalty, ambition, and danger wrapped into one record. People heard something real in it, even if they had never lived anything like it themselves. And real things tend to travel fast. By 2015, everything changed. Trap Queen climbed to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there. It became a sensation. It dominated radio. It dominated clubs. It dominated conversations. Suddenly, Fetty Wap was not just another rapper trying to get noticed. He was one of the faces of the moment. But here is something people often misunderstand about fame. One hit can be luck. 5 hits. That is momentum. And momentum is powerful. His debut album did more than introduce him to the world. It helped create multiple charting singles, which meant multiple revenue streams. Royalties. Touring. Performances. Appearances. Endorsements. The money was not coming from one place. It was flowing in from many directions at once, and that can make success feel permanent. That is when the numbers became hard to ignore. At his peak, Fetty Wap reportedly had $22 million sitting in a single account. Pause on that for a second. Not wealth spread quietly across long-term assets. Not money locked away and protected. Not a carefully managed portfolio designed to last decades. Liquid. Accessible. Right there. And, according to reports, he was making $100,000 a day. Every day. That is over $36 million a year. Now ask yourself honestly, if you woke up each morning and saw that kind of money hitting your account, would you think anything could ever stop? Would you imagine that the flood would slow? Would you assume that what was working today would still work tomorrow? Because the truth is, money at that level changes the way a person sees the world. It changes what feels normal. It changes what feels possible. Changes the size of every decision. At first, it looks like freedom. Then it starts to become expectation. Luxury cars. High-end habits. Spending without hesitation. A lifestyle built on momentum and confidence. But it was never just about reckless behavior. That would be too simple. What makes these stories more complicated is responsibility. When someone rises from a difficult environment, success rarely belongs to just one person. Family comes forward. Friends come closer. Old obligations resurface. New needs appear. Everyone wants to share in the victory, and the person who made it often feels pressure to provide, support, and maintain the image of the one who escaped. And that creates a difficult pattern. The money goes out. To people. To places. To habits. To obligations. To expectations that grow larger with every win. But what happens when the money going out keeps moving faster than the money coming in? What happens when the engine is still running, but the fuel is no longer flowing at the same speed? Because the industry does not stay loyal. It moves on. It always does. And by late 2017, the change was already happening. Not a dramatic collapse. Not a headline-worthy crash. Something slower. Something more dangerous. A decline. From $100,000 a day to $40,000. Then lower. Then lower again. Until the direction became impossible to ignore. And then came a moment that quietly confirmed what had already started to happen. A booking offer. $50,000 for a show. To most people, that sounds like an enormous amount of money. For most people, it is. But context changes everything. When you have been operating on an entirely different level, a number like that does not feel like a victory. It feels like a warning. It tells you that the market has changed. It tells you that people no longer value you the way they once did. It tells you that the spotlight is moving somewhere else. And that realization can be devastating. Because here is another hard question. What happens when your lifestyle is built for millions, but your income no longer supports the life you are trying to maintain? The cars remain expensive. The properties still need upkeep. The people around you still need help. The image still demands attention. The bills do not shrink just because the money does. That is the trap. The life keeps moving at full speed, while the system supporting it begins to weaken. But this story is not only about money. It is also about psychology. That part matters even more. When someone experiences extreme success early, especially without the kind of financial education that teaches caution and planning, it creates a dangerous gap. A gap between what they once had, what they believe they deserve, and what they now see slipping away. And for a person who came from nothing, that gap can feel unbearable. Because losing wealth is one thing. But losing identity? That is something else entirely. People do not only fear poverty. They fear becoming invisible again. They fear being forgotten. They fear returning to a version of life they worked so hard to escape. So what do people do when they feel that pressure building? They search for relief. Fast relief. Familiar relief. And that is where this story turns darker. Before the fame, Fetty understood the street economy. He knew how it worked. He knew how money moved. He knew the language, the rules, the risks, and the shortcuts. That knowledge did not vanish when the music took off. It stayed with him, waiting in the background, even as the world saw a different version of his life. Then came the years that changed everything. Between 2017 and 2019, something shifted. The exact moment is not the part that matters most. The exact conversation is not what defines the story. What matters is the outcome, because in October 2021, federal authorities revealed that they had been building a case for more than a year. An investigation. An indictment. A serious one. According to prosecutors, beginning around mid-2019, Fetty Wap became involved in a large-scale drug trafficking operation. This was not random. It was not small. It was not the kind of street-level activity that happens without structure. It was organized. Planned. Multi-state. The alleged operation moved substances from the West Coast to the East Coast, including Long Island and New Jersey. That means logistics, coordination, timing, transportation, communication. A chain of people who knew what they were doing and tried to keep it hidden. And one of the more striking details? A former corrections officer was allegedly involved. Why does that matter? Because these kinds of operations often depend on more than brute force. They depend on trust, access, and people who do not look suspicious at first glance. They depend on individuals who can move in spaces that others cannot. They depend on knowing how to stay a step ahead of attention. The methods described in the case were also said to be calculated. The use of the postal system. Vehicles with hidden compartments. Those are not beginner tactics. Those are methods that suggest planning and experience. And the scale was staggering. More than 100 kilograms of narcotics, including cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl. That last part is especially chilling. Fentanyl is not just another street drug. It is one of the most dangerous substances in circulation. Its presence raises the stakes of the entire case, because it is tied to a wider crisis that has affected countless lives. Which leads to an uncomfortable question. At what point does financial pressure push a person back into the very world they once tried to leave behind? That is what makes this story so difficult. Because it is not just about one artist. It is about a pattern that repeats itself everywhere. Sudden wealth. Sudden fame. No structure. No long-term protection. And then a collapse. The fall from the top is never the same as never being there at all. That is the part people overlook. When you have lived at the highest level of success, you do not just lose income when it slips. You lose the memory of ease. The memory of power. The memory of being able to say yes to anything. The memory becomes part of the burden because you remember what it felt like, and you compare it to what is happening now. That comparison can drive desperate behavior. Not always wise. Not always rational. But human. So let's step back and make this personal for a moment. Because this story is not just about a rapper, a criminal case, or headlines. It is about the weight of success. It is about what happens when a person is handed a life they were never truly prepared to manage. It is about the loneliness that can exist behind fame. It is about how quickly pressure can distort judgment. What would you do if your entire life changed overnight? Would you protect what you built, or would you chase more? Would you slow down, get help, and plan for the future, or would you believe the moment would last forever? Would you think long-term, or would you trust the instincts that helped you survive before fame? These are not easy questions. They are uncomfortable because they are real. And maybe that is why stories like this stay with people. They do not usually begin with disaster. They begin with small decisions. Quiet rationalizations. The belief that one choice will not matter. The hope that the next move will fix everything. The assumption that there will always be time to recover later. But later has a way of arriving faster than anyone expects. In the end, what makes the story of Fetty Wap so gripping is not just the rise or the fall. It is the space in between. That stretch of time where everything still looks intact from the outside, yet something underneath has already started to crack. That tension between what was gained and what was slipping away. That moment when the world is still looking at you, still cheering, still watching every move, but inside, something is already shifting. And that is the part that keeps people asking. Could things have gone differently? Was there a point where the road could have turned another way? Or was the pressure already too strong by the time anyone noticed? One thing is certain. Success can lift a person higher than they ever imagined. But without protection, guidance, and discipline, it can also leave them standing in a place where every step forward becomes a risk. And sometimes, the most dangerous moment is not the beginning of the fall. It is the moment right before it. Because that is when everything still feels manageable. That is when people still believe they can control the situation. That is when the warning signs are easy to ignore, especially when the money is coming in, the attention is growing, and everyone around you seems to be moving at the same speed. Now, when we shift into the legal side of this story, the tone changes fast. The charges tied to fentanyl distribution carried a level of urgency that separated them from typical drug cases. In federal court, fentanyl is not treated lightly, and for good reason. Its consequences are severe, not just legally, but socially. It is a substance connected to some of the most devastating outcomes in modern drug enforcement, which is exactly why prosecutors approached the case with such intensity. Prosecutors did not leave much room for interpretation when describing Fetty Wap's alleged role. This was not framed as someone loosely connected or simply present. He was labeled as a kilogram-level redistributor, someone directly involved in moving and selling large quantities of narcotics. That distinction matters, because it eliminates the "I was just around it" defense before it even begins. And when you step back and look at how situations like this develop, a pattern starts to emerge. One that has been discussed openly within the industry itself. There is a certain psychology behind it. Imagine this: you come into significant money quickly. Millions. Opportunities. Influence. But no roadmap. No structured guidance. No system in place to help you manage it. Nobody sits you down and says, "Here is how to protect your name, your future, and your freedom." What happens next? Do you invest carefully and build something sustainable? Or do you rely on what you already know? For many, the answer is simple. Even if it is not ideal. You fall back on familiarity. The logic, when explained, almost sounds practical. Use your own capital. Work with people you trust. Family, or those who feel like family. Keep things close. Controlled. Buy product. Move product. Scale it. The thinking is that if you stay inside a circle you reduce the chance of betrayal. You keep the profits in-house. You make the operation feel manageable. But here is the real question. Just because something makes money, does that make it worth the risk? And more importantly, does fast money ever truly lead to lasting success? When investigators eventually moved in, the case did not rely on speculation or weak connections. It was built on physical evidence. Search warrants uncovered approximately $1.5 million in cash, large quantities of cocaine and heroin, fentanyl pills, and multiple firearms. That is not the kind of evidence that disappears with a clever explanation. It is tangible. It is documented. It is difficult to dismiss. Once that kind of material is laid out in court, the story becomes much harder to reshape. At that point, the direction of the case was already clear. Then came the moment that shocked the industry. October 28, 2021. Federal prosecutors unsealed the indictment. But what made it unforgettable was not just the charges, it was where it happened. He was not at home. He was not in hiding. He was at Citi Field in Queens, New York. Minutes away from performing at Rolling Loud, one of the biggest hip-hop festivals in the country. Think about that for a second. You are about to walk on stage, in front of thousands of fans. The lights are about to hit. The crowd is waiting. The bass is about to drop. The energy is electric. The spotlight is yours. And then suddenly, it is over. Arrested. Taken away. How does someone process a moment like that? How does anyone go from the edge of a massive performance to the reality of a federal indictment in an instant? And more importantly, how did it get to that point in the first place? The scale of the allegations was massive. We are not talking about small-time activity. Prosecutors described a cross-country operation involving over 100 kilograms of narcotics. That level of organization does not happen randomly. It requires structure, coordination, and trust within a network. It takes planning. It takes repeated contact. It takes people willing to keep things moving while believing the system will never collapse. But here is something worth considering. When operations become that large, do they become harder to control? Or does the illusion of control become stronger? Because once a person starts seeing money flowing in and pressure building around them, the line between business and danger can blur quickly. At first, the decisions may feel calculated. Then they feel necessary. Then they begin to feel routine. And by the time the consequences arrive, the structure that once seemed solid may already be unstable. Eventually, the legal reality set in. Reports indicated that he would face at least 5 years in prison after pleading guilty to a conspiracy drug charge. And that is an important detail. At least 5 years. That was not the sentence. That was the minimum. The floor. So ask yourself, when someone reaches that point, what options are really left? Fight the case and risk something far worse? Or accept a deal and limit the damage? The plea came in August 2022. But before sentencing even happened, another decision changed everything. And it had nothing to do with drugs. It involved a FaceTime call. While out on bond, under strict federal conditions, an incident occurred that prosecutors quickly brought to the court's attention. The allegation? He appeared on a video call holding a firearm and made repeated threats toward another individual. Not implied. Not misunderstood. Clear. Direct. On camera. Now think about that. You are already facing serious federal charges. You have been granted temporary freedom under strict conditions. Every move matters. Every word matters. Every second of that freedom is on loan. Why take that risk? Was it emotion? Anger? A sense of invincibility? Or something deeper? Maybe it was the kind of impulse that grows when a person has spent too long living inside a world where pressure and pride are always in the same room. Maybe it was frustration. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was a moment that felt small to the person in it, but enormous to everyone else watching later. Whatever the reason, the consequences were immediate. The court did not hesitate. Bail was revoked. From that moment forward, there was no more freedom before sentencing. No more time outside. No more room to maneuver. He remained in custody. And that decision, separate from the original charges, spoke volumes about mindset. Because sometimes, it is not just the situation you are in. It is how you respond to it. When sentencing finally came in May 2023, the outcome reflected both the severity of the case and the circumstances surrounding it. 6 years in federal prison. 1 year above the mandatory minimum. Followed by 5 years of supervised release. Now, here is something worth thinking about. Why go above the minimum? Prosecutors pointed to various factors, including lyrical content that appeared to glorify aspects of the drug trade. That introduces a broader and more complicated question, one that has been argued in music, law, and culture for years. Where does artistic expression end, and real-world accountability begin? And should one influence the other? Because music often reflects environment, identity, survival, and memory. But when a person's public image, lyrics, and alleged conduct all begin to overlap, the boundary becomes harder to defend. Was the music simply storytelling? Was it self-expression? Or was it evidence of a deeper reality already unfolding in private? That question lingers because it does not have an easy answer. After sentencing, the next chapter began. Federal prison. FCI Sandstone in Minnesota. A low-security facility, but still a prison. And here is something many people misunderstand. Inside those walls, none of the outside success matters. Not the money. Not the fame. Not the recognition. Everything resets. The man who once stood in front of stadium-sized crowds is now just another name in a regulated environment, where schedules are fixed, movement is limited, and every day follows the rules of a system built to strip away status. There are no performance lights. No backstage comfort. No luxury cars waiting outside. No cheering crowd to soften the silence. So what does a person fall back on when all external identity is stripped away? That is where clarity often begins. During his time inside, there were signs of change. Participation in rehabilitation programs. Educational efforts. Consistent engagement with institutional requirements. These are not glamorous details, but they matter. Because they show adaptation, growth, or at the very least, awareness. And that leads to another important question. Can time away from everything actually create the space needed for reflection? Or does it simply pause the inevitable? For some people, prison becomes a place of collapse. For others, it becomes a place of reckoning. There is no guarantee either way. But when the noise is removed, the truth has a way of becoming harder to avoid. A person cannot outrun the same choices forever. Eventually, the silence forces a conversation. In this case, the outcome suggests something shifted. Through earned credits and participation, the sentence was effectively reduced. And on January 8, 2026, after roughly 3 years, he transitioned out of prison into home and community confinement. Not fully free, but no longer behind bars. Still under supervision. Still restricted. But moving forward. That matters, because it is easy to talk about punishment in abstract terms, but much harder to talk about what comes after. What happens when the public attention fades but the consequences remain? What happens when a person has to rebuild a life under conditions that do not allow for fantasy? What does redemption look like when the world still remembers the fall? Now we arrive at the part of the story that matters most. Not the charges. Not the sentencing. But the lesson. Because at its core, this is not just about one individual. It is about a pattern. Sudden success. Rapid wealth. Limited guidance. And the pressure to maintain a lifestyle that may not be sustainable. So ask yourself, what does it really mean to respect money? Is it about spending it, showing it, or understanding it? Understanding what it can do, and what it cannot. Because money on its own does not create stability. Structure does. Planning does. Awareness does. There is a deeper layer here that often gets overlooked. When wealth arrives quickly, especially for individuals coming from difficult circumstances, it does not come with instructions. There is no built-in system teaching you how to manage it, protect it, or grow it. So people rely on what they know. And sometimes, what they know was never designed for long-term success. That is not an excuse. But it is a reality. At his peak, performance fees reportedly reached around $250,000 per show. Think about that. What would most people do with that kind of income? Would they invest it wisely? Would they surround themselves with better guidance? Would they slow down long enough to protect the future? Or would they assume the momentum could never end? And when that income slows down, as it often does in entertainment, what happens next? Do you adjust your lifestyle? Or try to maintain it at all costs? This is where the real danger lies. Not in poverty. Not in desperation. But in the gap between expectation and reality. The money slows down. But the lifestyle does not. So something has to give. And sometimes, the choices made in that moment carry consequences far beyond what anyone expects. There is also something else worth acknowledging. The difference between hard money and easy money. The music industry is unpredictable. Success can fade. Trends change. Audiences move on. It requires patience, reinvention, consistency. It rewards those who can adapt and survive in public while staying disciplined in private. But the streets? The system there is faster, more direct, more familiar for some. So when faced with uncertainty, which path feels easier? And which one carries the greater risk? That is the decision point that defines so many cautionary stories. Not the moment of fame itself, but the moment after fame when the future still has to be protected. In the end, what we are looking at is not just a rise and fall. It is a cycle. Build, peak, decline, decision, consequence, and then a second chance. But here is the real question. What happens next? Because that part has not been written yet. And maybe that is why this story keeps people talking. It is not only about what was lost. It is about what might still be possible. It is about the fragile line between momentum and mistake, between celebration and collapse, between being admired by the world and being trapped by your own choices. So let's come back to you one more time. If everything you have built started slipping tomorrow, what would you rely on? Your skills, your discipline, your network, or something else entirely? And would that foundation push you forward, or pull you back to where you started? Because success is not just about reaching the top. It is about what you do once you get there. And more importantly, how you handle what comes after.